Or can he escape the shadows of betrayal? The train moved slowly, rocking gently as it traveled. The sound of the wheels clicking against the tracks was a familiar and comforting noise. Marilee Burgess rested her head against Dr. Daniel Richard Jordan-Eyre as she slept. He looked down at her with a smile, knowing she would be embarrassed to find out that she snored softly. It was a light, wheezing sound, but she did snore. Daniel had first seen the lovely Marilee at the station in New Orleans, Louisiana. This city, known as the Crescent City, rested beside a bend in the Mississippi River. While he often thought of it as a tough place, he would still miss it since it had been his home for 36 years. He had grown up on Canal Street, playing basketball with friends and family. He married Annette Toole, and they had 3 children together. Sadly, all of his children had died from illness. When Annette announced that she was expecting again, he felt a mix of joy and fear. The birth was difficult, but with one final push, Annette brought their child into the world. To Daniel's shock, the newborn was black. After the surprise wore off, he was filled with anger and vowed to confront the man he believed had fathered the child. That night, both Moses Edwards and Cleophas Jones left the Jordan-Eyre home. It didn't matter whether they ran away out of guilt or fear. Daniel knew that he wouldn't find out what happened to Annette and the baby. Once Annette was well enough to travel, he packed her things and took her to her father's house. However, Mr. Toole took one look at his daughter and her baby and refused to let them in, slamming the door on them. With a harsh expression, Daniel ignored Annette's pleas and left quickly. "It meant something to me, even if you think it didn't," he thought bitterly. "We will not overcome this betrayal." 12 years of love and marriage felt wasted. He had cherished her letters while serving in the war, eagerly anticipating the day he could return home and be with Annette again. When Daniel volunteered for the army, he told General Dagrapont that he was a dentist. General Dagrapont declared that Daniel was now a surgeon. "I don't need dentists, but we always need good surgeons," he said. Daniel replied dryly, "Some might really need a good dentist," glancing at General Dagrapont's badly chipped and stained teeth. Daniel had learned to be an army surgeon, setting bones, removing bullets, and performing amputations when necessary. When the war ended with General Lee's surrender, Daniel returned to his cherished New Orleans. His dental practice was thriving again, and he enjoyed being part of the city's upper class. Yet inside, Daniel Jordan-Eyre felt empty and defeated. His marriage to Annette Toole had started to lift his spirits, and the births of their children brought him joy. But the betrayal by his dear Annette took away the last bits of happiness the war had left him. Daniel believed that people were talking about him behind his back. He thought some were laughing at the poor dentist whose wife was unfaithful. The newspapers were filled with stories about the opportunities out west, and Daniel decided it was time for a fresh start. After the pain of his wife's betrayal, the West seemed to offer a new beginning with clearer skies and brighter prospects. Selling everything he owned, except for his dental tools, Dr. Jordan-Eyre chose Colorado as his new home. The newspapers described the beautiful sunrises over the huge Rockies, the pure springs in the mountains, the abundant wildlife, and the newfound riches of gold and silver. With a final goodbye to friends and acquaintances, Daniel stood on the platform, waiting. He noticed Marilee Burgess, dressed in her best clothes, getting ready to board a train. He saw 2 older women with her, likely her mother and sister, or perhaps an aunt. A conductor called for everyone to board. Just then, a man in worn-out clothes kindly offered to help the lady with her bag. Daniel knew that most of these so-called helpers would run off with the luggage. "Make sure to help her," Daniel said firmly. The man looked back and saw Daniel's strong build. It would be hard for the women to chase him, but Daniel would definitely catch him if he tried to run. With a reluctant nod, the man helped the woman with her bag. "Thanks, sir." The man smiled after Daniel handed him a nickel. "I could have managed fine without your help," the young lady said with a hint of annoyance. "I'm sure you could have," Daniel replied with a smile before finding a seat on the train. Soon, the train started moving. With a loud noise and some jolting, the train finally started moving. As New Orleans zipped by, Daniel thought about his dear Annette one last time before focusing on what awaited him in the West. Before they even reached Baton Rouge, a young woman named Marilee was approached by 3 different men who wanted to keep her company on her journey. "This train has all kinds of people who might take advantage of a pretty girl like you," one man said with a smirk. He sat close to her on the bench and casually put an arm around her shoulders, making her feel trapped by the window. "Do you want to get rid of this man?" Daniel asked Marilee in French, knowing she could understand. "Please," she replied, clearly feeling flustered. "Sir, please leave the young lady alone," Daniel said in English, making sure the man noticed the pistol at his side. "Oh, I'm very sorry, I didn't realize," the man stammered. "I'm sure you didn't," Daniel responded, allowing the man to keep some dignity. "Thank you," Marilee said gratefully. Daniel took a seat across from her, giving her space on the bench. "I'm happy to help," he said with a kind smile. They talked easily, and Daniel learned she was 18, from New Orleans like him, and was on her way to Colorado. "I'm engaged to William Jacob Benhurst III, she said proudly. From her bag, she pulled out a photo of a young man with slicked back hair. Daniel thought he looked rather full of himself, but kept that opinion to himself. He remembered trying to sit still for a photo and how uncomfortable it had felt. "His father is the mayor of the town, which is also named Benhurst," Marilee continued, sounding proud of it. "And how did you meet William?" Daniel asked politely as he handed the photo back to her. "He put an ad in the newspaper," she explained, adding that they had exchanged letters and she had even sent him her own picture. After seeing her photo, William had told her he wanted to get married right away. "I have another photo here," she said with a happy giggle, pulling out a second picture. "What else do you have in that big handbag of yours?" Daniel joked. "Maybe a horse?" The second photo showed a very beautiful young woman. The photographer captured many details in the picture of Marilee. Her beautiful, thick hair, her light eyes, her fair skin, her well-defined nose and chin, and her full lips stood out clearly. The photograph also highlighted Marilee's figure as she leaned slightly forward on the table. The neckline of her dress offered a subtle glimpse of her chest. With some hesitation, Daniel prepared to give the photo to Marilee. "No, please keep it," Marilee said kindly, placing her hand gently on his arm. Her movement drew his attention to her figure. "After all," she added in French, in case someone was listening, "a father should cherish a photo of his daughter, right?" "I will hold on to my daughter's photo close to my heart," Daniel promised as he slipped it into his shirt pocket. Marilee then asked about the scar below his eye, gently touching it with her gloved finger. "Oh, you were in the war?" she exclaimed when he mentioned it was from a Union soldier's sword. "Yes, I served in the army of the blind general," Daniel replied. "General Degrapont?" Marilee gasped. "My father fought alongside him." When she asked if he knew a man named Anatole Burgess, Daniel simply shrugged. He remembered Corporal Burgess as someone who had given up at the first sign of trouble. The general had punished him and 2 others for deserting. Daniel didn't see a reason to share that story with Marilee. He recalled how one of the men had been upset about leaving his family in New Orleans, but he remembered the men were covered and bound when the ropes were tied. "A wife and a daughter? You should have stayed strong for them," General Degrapont had shouted at the time, even striking the man. "We fight for the honor of our women. That is why we must stay united against the Union." "There were many in General Degrapont's army, dear Marilee," Daniel said softly. "Some didn't survive long enough for me to know them." General Clayton David Degrapont was known for being in charge of the Confederate Army more because of connections than true ability. His troops often arrived late to battles, missing the main fights against the Union. Outside of Paulton, Louisiana, on their way to Vicksburg, Mississippi, General Degrapont's men encountered a large number of Union soldiers. The conflict was intense, and during the battle, General Degrapont was injured by shrapnel. Not wanting his men to lose hope in the battle, the man led charge after charge until the smaller Confederate army won. As the train moved steadily, Daniel and Marilee enjoyed a comfortable silence. Another man who had gotten on the train in Lafayette, Louisiana, tried to talk to Marilee. He even had the nerve to put his hand on her thigh. "Sir, please remove your hand from my daughter's leg," Daniel said, his face showing his anger. The man turned to respond, but stopped when he saw Daniel's large knife. "Conductor, this man needs to leave," Daniel said loudly. "Right, off with you," the conductor replied. The man complained loudly, but the conductor, a heavy-set man, took him to the back of the train until they reached the next stop. "Maybe I should sit next to you," Daniel suggested. He quickly assured Merrily that he was not being disrespectful. He just wanted her to have a pleasant journey. "Agreed," Merrily replied. With a smile, she added, "Father." "But why are you traveling alone?" Daniel asked as he took a seat next to her. "William sent the money for my ticket, but I didn't think my mother and Aunt Annie could afford to come with me," Merrily explained. "Then you should have asked William to send money for them, too," Daniel said firmly. Hours later, the young girl rested her head against him, her side touching his arm. In Dallas, Texas, they had to switch trains. Daniel helped Merrily with her bag and found his own trunk. "May I buy you dinner?" Daniel asked as he led her to the small dining area in the station. "Oh, I didn't realize, Daniel, I have no money for food," Merrily admitted. That was something William should have thought about, Daniel thought to himself. "Don't worry, I'm here," he said with a smile, and she looked pleased. After their meal and a quick visit to the station's washrooms, the conductor announced that their train would leave shortly. "Right on time," Daniel said to the conductor as they boarded the train. Both Daniel and Merrily were very tired when their train finally stopped in Denver, Colorado. The station master told Daniel that Benhurst, Colorado, was one day's journey by stagecoach. "And when does the next stagecoach leave for Benhurst?" he asked. "Tomorrow at 12 noon, the man replied. "Well, I need 2 tickets for that coach and these bags to go with it," Daniel said, handing over the money. Then Daniel scratched his head, thinking about their journey ahead. It had started to feel uncomfortable, a little grimy. "Do you know where my daughter and I might find a place to stay for the night?" Daniel asked. Merrily smiled and placed her hand on Daniel's arm. The man pointed out a nearby inn. He also offered to take care of their bags and ensure they were ready for the next coach. "And is there a telegraph office nearby?" Daniel asked. "Right this way, sir," the man said, unlocking the small office. "Merrily, send William a message to let him know we'll arrive in Benhurst tomorrow," Daniel instructed. She quickly wrote a short message and the station master sent it off. "Now, my dear, wouldn't you like to get your hair done? You should look your best when you meet your fiancé," Daniel suggested. "I'm going to visit the barber here." "Oh, Daniel, do keep the mustache," Merrily said with a smile. She gently brushed her gloved finger across his mustache. Her face lit up as she gazed at him. "It looks so handsome, so refined," she added. Daniel didn't entirely agree, knowing there were a few gray hairs mixed in. But he smiled and nodded. "As you wish, dear Merrily," he said. He thought $1 for a shave and haircut was a bit much, but the barber explained it included a full wash, and Daniel agreed. "And my daughter insists I keep the mustache," he mentioned to the barber as the man lathered his hair. "Understood," the barber replied. "You've missed your calling," Daniel remarked after seeing the results. "How's that, sir?" the barber asked, grinning. "You should have been a butcher," Daniel joked. Outside, Merrily once again touched his mustache and smiled. He smiled back, appreciating her gentle gesture. Daniel felt a brief pang of jealousy, a fleeting regret that William Benhurst would soon be the one sharing these moments with her. He quickly pushed the thought away and offered Merrily his arm as they walked from the barber to the hotel. At the hotel, they found rooms available and ordered 2 hot wash bins. Daniel soaked in the hot water, scrubbing himself clean with the soap until his skin felt fresh. He thought of Merrily, just across the hall, also washing up and preparing for the next part of their journey. He let his mind wander for a moment before returning his focus to the present. After relaxing in the bath, he felt refreshed and ready to continue their journey the next day. He had come across Annette while she was washing, lathering her curly brown hair. Then he recalled Annette lifting her dress and spending time with another man. That thought quickly made his excitement fade. Daniel stood up, dried himself off, and stepped out of the cool water. He called into the wall horn to say he was done with his wash. "Very good, sir," came the soft reply. The next morning, Daniel went across the hall and gently knocked on Merrily's door. She opened it with a smile. Merrily had her hair arranged nicely and wore a fresh dress. After they had breakfast, they walked to the station to wait for the stagecoach. "Oh, thank you, sir," said the station master when Daniel handed him $1 as a tip for his good service. Then Daniel helped Merrily into the dark inside of the small carriage. She carefully placed her foot on the iron step at the bottom of the high carriage. Her left hand held on to Daniel's hand, and her right hand gripped the handle next to the door. Daniel placed his hand on the small of her back and gently helped her up. His hand brushed against her as she stepped up, and he felt a quick wave of jealousy for William Benhurst III. Then he took a seat across from Merrily. "Just those two?" the stagecoach driver complained as the station master closed the door. "Yes, just them and the mail," the station master replied sharply. The stagecoach started moving. Once they left the city, the ride became bumpy. Daniel and Merrily bounced on their seats with every jolt. "Here, Merrily, there are straps to hold on to," Daniel yelled over the noise. "Oh!" Merrily exclaimed as a bump in the road sent her tumbling into Daniel. "Here, take this strap in your left hand and put your right arm around my waist. I will do the same," Daniel suggested. Once they were settled, they managed to hold on as the carriage moved along the rocky path. They stopped once to drop off some packages and again to change horses and drivers. Each time, Daniel and Merrily had 20 minutes to take care of personal tasks or maybe buy a cold meat pie from the vendor. "I feel really sick, I can't eat," Merrily complained at the first stop. By the second stop, her hunger forced her to ask Daniel to buy some apples from the vendor. "As if I could say no to you, my dear." Daniel grinned and got the apples for her. "You're a good husband," the vendor said, showing his damaged teeth. "He is not my husband," Merrily replied with a smile, gently touching Daniel's arm. "No, that honor belongs to someone else," Daniel said, smiling sadly as he bought some plums for himself. Their sleep was restless. The road was quite bumpy. Whenever they tried to sleep, the carriage either jolted or dropped suddenly. Finally, as Daniel guessed it was nearly 2 in the morning, Merrily leaned against him. She started snoring softly, first with a light wheeze. But as the carriage rocked slowly down an incline, her snoring grew into a gentle rumble. She murmured with content as Daniel put an arm around her shoulders, and soon he also drifted off into dreams. The carriage stopped, and Daniel heard crickets chirping and distant coyote calls. Suddenly, they were off again with a jolt. They woke at dawn, both tired and eager to stretch their legs, but not upset with each other. Merrily smiled sweetly at Daniel. "Ah, you are the most wonderful pillow," she teased. "I think I will miss your breathing in my ear," Daniel replied with a smile. "Benhurst is our next stop," their driver announced when they reached another stop. "We're changing horses there, but that's as far as you're going, right?" "Yes, that's right," Daniel nodded. "I will be so thankful when this journey is over," Merrily said. "Soon, my dear, soon," Daniel reassured her. At Benhurst, William Benhurst Jr. and William Benhurst III were there to welcome Merrily Burgess. Daniel got down first, grinned at the 2 Benhurst men, and then offered his hand to help Merrily from the carriage. She took his hand, reached for the step with her foot, and stumbled. Daniel quickly reached out and caught her before she fell. As he moved, his hand accidentally touched her. Once she was steady on the ground, Daniel withdrew his hand. Merrily smiled and expressed her thanks, then gave a small curtsy to the 2 Benhurst men. "Merrily, my dear, I can hardly believe you are finally here," William said. "It's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am," Will added. Daniel noticed that the photograph matched William Jacob Benhurst III. The 24-year-old seemed proud, somewhat round in his clothes, which did not fit well. His hands looked soft, as if he had never worked hard. His hair was carefully styled and shiny. William Jacob Benhurst Jr. looked similar, short and round with soft features, and the hair he still had was slicked down. "Don't judge a book by its cover," Daniel's mother often told him. Once again, William III expressed his happiness at meeting such a lovely young woman as Merrily. He even bent down to kiss her gloved hand. "Thank you," Merrily said. "And may I introduce my father, Dr. Daniel Jordanaire?" "Doctor? What kind of doctor are you?" Will asked. "I am a dentist by training," Daniel replied. "But during the war I did many surgeries." "And, Dr. Jordanaire, will you be making Benhurst your home?" Billy asked. "I think I have found my home for now," Daniel agreed. He had planned to stay in Denver, but I convinced him Benhurst would be better, Merrily smiled. "That she did," Daniel said, returning her smile. Daniel's first task was to find a place to stay. His second was to find an office to work in. Will, being the mayor, was very helpful. There's an old lawyer's office just down the street, he said. He pointed in that direction. 3 Mexican men came out of a nearby saloon, smiling as they approached. Will pointed to Daniel's bags and trunk, and the 4 began to walk along the wooden sidewalk. And right above that is a small 3-room apartment, Will continued. The only thing is, the Main Street Saloon is right across the street. He glanced at Marilee to ensure she couldn't hear them. They have some dancers. Quite a show, I tell you, he whispered. How would you know that unless you've been in the saloon? Daniel asked. William Jacob Benhurst III, Billy, pointed out various shops and sites as they followed Dr. Jordanaire and Mayor Benhurst. Marilee listened closely. This town would soon be her home. A taxidermist? What do you need a taxidermist for? She asked. To preserve and display animal heads, Billy answered. And then what do you do with the head? She inquired. You hang it on your wall? Billy replied. I shot a big horn elk once. Its horns were almost 3 feet long. That goes on my wall just above the door of my office. He says he shot it, and his cousin Elroy says he got it too. Never know which one to believe, Will whispered to Daniel. Does your son often tell lies? Daniel thought to ask. Strange, lively music came from an open doorway. Will pointed toward it. And that's the Golden Buddha, he said. He leaned closer to Daniel. Really not a good place, he whispered. Those Chinese people? They don't believe in Christ, you know. Anyway, they have these girls who wash you for $2. The girl comes right into the bath with you and scrubs you all over. Daniel considered saying that Mayor Benhurst wouldn't know this unless he had been there himself. But he guessed that as mayor, William Benhurst Jr. probably kept track of the types of businesses in his town. Bathe? Billy, are you sure about this? Daniel heard Marilee say. Billy, come here for a moment, Will called out. Sir, Billy replied, hurrying over. Best not to tell her about that Golden Buddha place. She might think we go there often, Will warned his son. Yes, sir, Billy answered, looking down. As they walked along the wooden planks, Daniel learned that Will used to be a lawyer in St. Louis, Missouri, but he bought several thousand acres of land in this U.S. territory and moved here. It was lucky for him that gold and silver were found, and the town of Benhurst quickly grew. He also found out that Billy was the deputy mayor, helping his father run the town. What will you do if you are no longer the mayor? Daniel asked as they crossed the dusty path to the former lawyer's office. What do you mean by that? Will replied, surprised. I assume elections happen here. I also assume that someone might want to take your place as mayor, Daniel said, while Will fumbled with a key on a large ring attached to his belt. No one has challenged me so far, Will said firmly, upset that anyone would question his leadership. Daniel liked the offices and found the upstairs living space suitable for now. He mentioned that he might build a home and work some land in the future. Just north of the Oregon Territory, they grow apples, he explained. I believe those fruits would grow well here, too. Well then, Will said, I know just the place for you. There's even a stream running through it. But now I am very hungry, Daniel said, and I'm sure Marilee could use some food, too. The Main Street Saloon serves lunch, Billy suggested. His father gave him a stern look, which made him quiet. Yes, but their Mexican food is pretty spicy, Will said. At the end of the street, Eleanor serves a really good meal. Then we should go to Eleanor's, Daniel agreed. The 3 young men from Mexico arrived at the house carrying bags for Daniel and Marilee. Daniel pointed out that the bed upstairs should be for Marilee, while he would sleep on the couch in the living room. Oh, I thought she would be, Billy started to say. When you 2 are married and not a moment sooner, Daniel said firmly. Then we will get married by nightfall, Billy announced. Marilee chuckled at his excitement. Daniel was less amused. Will smiled at his son and gave him a light pat on the shoulder. Take your time, son, he said. Will then kindly paid the 3 young men for helping with the luggage. News quickly spread that Benhurst had a dentist, and a very good one at that. Daniel often stepped out of the back room to find his office filled with townspeople and miners. His time in the army also came in handy. Dr. Jordanaire was often called to help those hurt while drinking or during fights. Those who got hurt while working were told to be more careful next time. Those injured while using a weapon received serious warnings from an upset Dr. Jordanaire. Only the good Lord knows when it's our time to go, he would say loudly. Now I will remove this bullet from your side. Let the pain remind you that talking things out is better than fighting. For those close to death, Daniel showed great kindness. He would hold their hands and read comforting words from the Bible as they felt their life fading. This worried the local Baptist minister, as Dr. Jordanare even worked on Sundays. "Reverend Dumble, pain doesn't take a day off," Daniel replied when the minister confronted him. He put a gentle hand on the minister's arm. "Just as you serve our Lord, I serve others in a different way. You care for their souls, and I care for their bodies, my friend," Daniel said. "But your daughter is also working," the Reverend said, somewhat calmer. "She is learning valuable lessons about helping others," Daniel explained. "And while she feels like family to me, Marilee is not my biological daughter." Daniel suspected some people visited more to see Marilee's cheerful face and warm smile as she greeted his patients. Billy seemed happy that others were interested in his fiancée. McCall, the local dressmaker, was hard at work on Marilee's wedding dress, using layers of soft chiffon and ivory silk. Marilee hesitated at the $12 the woman asked for, but Daniel approved it with a nod. "Father, when I am married, I will pay you back," she said firmly. "My dear Marilee, you have already given me plenty in return," Daniel replied. In the mornings, the Main Street Saloon offered a breakfast called Huevos Rancheros, which both Marilee and Daniel enjoyed. It was served by a sleepy-looking Mexican girl who annoyed Marilee by being too friendly with Daniel. "What do you think, dear Marilee?" Daniel joked. "You have no right to be jealous." "Until I am Mrs. William Jacob Benhurst III, I definitely do," Marilee insisted. The evening meals were served by the matron of the place. She smiled, revealing a mouth that had more gaps than teeth. She told Daniel in Spanish that he could choose any of her daughters to accompany him. She said this while glancing at her husband, a very large man. "What? What is she saying?" Marilee asked Daniel. "She is just wishing us a good meal," Daniel lied to her. The matron laughed and waved a finger at Daniel before welcoming some new customers. Her husband smiled at Daniel with a wink. Will Benhurst showed Daniel 50 acres of land just west of the town. It was Sunday morning just after sunrise. Daniel watched an eagle soaring in the sky and the sun shining on the stream, with morning dew covering the grass. In the peaceful morning, he felt a gentle breeze. $3 an acre, Will offered. "Mr. Benhurst, I know I should negotiate with you," Daniel smiled. "But $3 an acre is a fair price. You have a deal." Those who couldn't pay for Daniel's services were asked to help out instead. Pre-cut lumber was ordered from Denver, and after hanging a closed sign on his door, Daniel led a group of horses and buggies to his new home. Some women who were helping would seek Marilee's advice, ignoring Daniel's directions. "Come on, this is my home, not hers," Daniel said, frustrated, as one woman told her husband to place a window where Marilee suggested. "And when you're as quick as she is, then I'll listen to you," the woman replied, again saying her husband should follow Marilee's wishes. Marilee touched Daniel's face gently, calming his anger. She smiled up at him, and he couldn't help but smile back. "Father, the window will let the evening light into the room," she explained softly. Billy, as always, was nearby, underfoot. He, of course, did not lift any tools, carry wood, or paint. Finally, the day of their wedding arrived. Reverend Dumble greeted Daniel warmly, thinking back to when he had a painful tooth problem. Daniel had helped him by taking out the bad tooth, making it easier than expected. Daniel asked for a favor in return, that the Reverend marry Marilee and William. "But I was going to do that anyway," Reverend Dumble replied. "Isn't it wonderful how things work out?" Daniel smiled. "Now I need a couch, so please close the door on your way out." The Reverend then welcomed Dr. Jordanare as if they were old friends. He proudly introduced Daniel to his wife, Jennifer Dumble, who had a strong appearance. She smiled quietly and then went to play hymns on the piano, while the congregation sang along, mostly from memory rather than reading the words. "Now, if you could bring Marilee into the house of the Lord," Reverend Dumble encouraged Daniel. Daniel nodded and walked to a small room in the entrance of the wooden building. He knocked once and opened the door. "Dear Pierre, should I really go through with this?" Marilee asked when Daniel walked in. "Dear Marilee, many brides have wondered the same thing," he smiled. "Even my own wife said she once asked her father the same thing." "Wife? What happened to her? Merrily asked. You've never mentioned her. She is not important. Today is all about you, Daniel replied. Merrily looked into his light, almost golden brown eyes and sensed the deep sadness behind them. You have been hurt, she whispered. She stood and gently touched his face. I should not add to your sorrow, dear pair, she said softly as her finger traced his mustache. Ah, but you have, he tried to joke. From the moment you said you were promised to someone else, you have certainly affected me. She smiled at his words and laughed when he playfully caught her finger. Merrily then kissed him gently. She turned, picked up her bouquet of flowers, and took his arm. Let's go, dear pair, she said. Daniel cried during the ceremony. He sobbed openly as the minister declared them husband and wife and announced that Merrily Burgess would now be called Mrs. William Jacob Benhurst III. He continued to cry as the beautiful young woman took her new husband's arm and they walked out of the church. Come on, man, pull yourself together, Will joked. His eyes were also misty. The two men, without hesitation, hugged each other before joining the bride and groom at the church door. The next morning, Daniel walked slowly to the entrance of the Main Street Saloon. He had drunk a lot of Will's whiskey and couldn't remember how he ended up on the couch in his office. His new home was ready, with furniture delivered from St. Louis and Denver, but he wasn't able to find his way back home. He was just thankful he didn't wake up in the stable under his horse. A tired-looking waitress welcomed him and then looked around. Where's your wife? She asked. She is not my wife, Daniel replied with a pained smile. The girl raised an eyebrow and asked if he was feeling all right. I had a bit too much to drink, he admitted. Ah, Senor Doctor, please wait here, she said. A few moments later, she came back with a frothy glass. Daniel hesitated, unsure about it. Drink it, Senor Doctor, it's the cure, a round man called out from the kitchen doorway. Daniel gritted his teeth and downed the strong drink. Ha! Ha! How does that taste? The man laughed as Daniel struggled, feeling it burn in his throat. After a brief moment, Daniel had to admit he felt a bit better, more awake than before. When the waitress brought his breakfast, he managed to eat. He noticed she had loosened the ribbons of her top, and as she leaned forward, he felt it reminded him of someone special in his life. Stop it, Daniel, she's not yours, he told himself, forcing a smile at the young waitress. Later that evening, instead of going home, Daniel enjoyed dinner at Eleanor's and then strolled through town. The sky was getting darker, and many shops had already closed. The few that remained open had soft lights glowing through their curtains. He could hear cheerful music and laughter coming from the Golden Nugget, another busy bar in the growing town. He noted with a strange satisfaction that for every church in Benhurst, there seemed to be 3 bars, each claiming to have the best entertainment. As he walked by the open door, he glanced inside. Men sat at tables, some playing cards, others with drinks. A few women walked among them, dressed in light clothing, chatting quietly with the men. Occasionally, a man would nod and get up, and one of the women would take his hand to lead him somewhere. Hey, want a bath? A nice hot bath? Very clean, very soothing, a man called out, speaking with a thick accent. Daniel turned to see he was near the Golden Buddha. How much for a bath? Daniel asked, stepping across the dusty road. For a man like you? The man asked. $2? All right, $2, Daniel agreed, handing him the coins. Good man, an honest man. Pay first, no sneaking off, the man said cheerfully, taking Daniel's arm and leading him into the dimly lit foyer. Another man appeared, bowing and smiling as he guided Daniel up 2 flights of stairs. He knocked on a door and opened it. Inside the room was a cast-iron bathtub. As the door opened, a second door on the opposite side swung open, and 2 women entered, each carrying large pots of steaming water. They wore simple silk robes tied at the waist. They poured the water into the tub and left the room, repeating the process until steam rose gently from the tub. The man shouted something in a language Daniel didn't understand. One of the women took the empty pots and quickly exited. The second, a shorter woman, bowed to Daniel. The man patted Daniel's arm, chuckled, and then left the room through the main door. The woman approached Daniel and, with practiced hands, untied his bow tie and slipped off his jacket, placing it carefully on a chair. She unbuttoned his shirt, and though Daniel felt a bit uneasy, he allowed her to continue. She neatly folded his clothes as she removed them. Soon, Daniel stood bare, feeling slightly self-conscious, though the woman remained professional. She led him to the tub, helping him step onto a small bench and then into the warm, steaming water. Inside the tub, a wooden shelf held several tools, brushes, and soap. Another shelf rested below the water. In the center, there was a curved piece of wood designed to support the back. Daniel eased into the water, leaning against the curved piece. The woman silently untied her own sash, removed her robe, and hung it on a hook. She then swiftly gathered her long black hair, twisting it into a bun and securing it with small wooden sticks. She moved gracefully, her actions efficient and calm. Without saying a word, she prepared herself to assist. Her movements focused on her task as Daniel settled into the bath, appreciating the warm water's comfort. Her expression remained puzzled as she stood at the edge of the tub. Daniel tried to ask, "How old are you?" But she didn't seem to understand. He repeated the question in Spanish, hoping she might recognize it, as many workers in the town spoke the language. She only shook her head in response. "Your age?" Daniel asked once more, this time in French. Her eyes lit up and she smiled brightly. "You speak French?" she exclaimed, surprised and happy. "A little," Daniel replied. At that moment, the other woman who had been outside heard the excitement and rushed into the room. The two exchanged a few quick words in a foreign language before the other woman bowed and left, closing the door behind her. Daniel asked again, "How old are you?" "I am 20, she answered simply. The young woman then stepped into the tub and sat on a submerged bench behind Daniel, her legs positioned to straddle his back so she could help with the bath. "But there is no hair," Daniel said, curious. "It is removed," she explained as she began to pour hot water gently over Daniel's back with a wooden ladle. In fluent French, she introduced herself as Nguyen Mu, born as Nguyen Se. She came from a small village in French Indochina where her father was a cobbler. He had always longed for a son to pass down his trade to, but instead, he had 9 daughters. As she continued, Daniel felt her softly ladling the warm water onto his shoulders, the fragrance of cloves and ginger filling the air. Nguyen Mu spoke with a Parisian French accent, while Daniel's French was from Creole, making it a bit challenging to follow each other, so he asked her to slow down. Nguyen Mu told her story in a calm voice. Her father had been protective and strict. Many men had sought to marry her or her sisters, but her father believed none were worthy. 2 of her sisters had defied him, running off to marry soldiers, causing shame for their family. The eldest had married a French diplomat, while Nguyen Mu was eventually married to a man from another village who met her father's demands. As she gently scrubbed Daniel's back with a soft brush, she continued to share pieces of her life, speaking quietly as the steam rose from the bath, filling the room with warmth. Nguyen Mu's husband had promised her father that he was a good and honorable businessman. He said he would take her to America, where she would work in a ribbon factory. "Does your husband know you're here doing this?" Daniel asked as she rinsed the soap from his back and shoulders. "He is the man at the door who told me to give you this bath," she replied, her voice tinged with frustration. She moved around and stood in front of him. Her expression seemed playful, but Daniel felt uncomfortable. She laughed softly when she noticed his reaction. As she knelt in the water, she lifted one of his legs and began to scrub his foot with a brush. Daniel flinched slightly at the touch, but tried to relax. Her small smile showed she was aware of his discomfort. Nguyen Mu shared that her husband, Mu Tui, insisted that she remove all the hair from her body. She raised her arm to show Daniel there was no hair under her arms. She explained that the first time she was told to bathe someone, she had cried and begged not to do it. In response, Mu Tui had beaten her with a belt. When that didn't work, he had threatened her with a hot poker, pressing it close enough to her face that she could feel the heat. She quietly revealed a small scar on her arm from where the metal had burned her. As she continued bathing Daniel, she accidentally brushed his leg, causing him to jerk again. She didn't say anything but smiled and kept working, rinsing his feet and legs. She finished scrubbing and gently rinsed the soap from his chest and underarms, working carefully but quickly. Though she smiled and tried to remain calm, Daniel could see that the whole situation weighed on her. Her light comments and laughter felt like a way to hide her own discomfort. When she finished, Nguyen Mu quietly continued her task. focusing on washing away the soap and water, keeping the moment professional despite the situation. Afterward, she simply nodded, signaling that the bath was complete, and Daniel felt the tension in the air begin to lift as the task was finished. Nguyen Mu gently helped Daniel out of the bath, and they both dried off quickly. She worked with quiet efficiency, making sure Daniel was comfortable, her demeanor calm and professional throughout. Once he was dry, she began assisting him with his clothes, making sure everything was neatly in place. As she tied his bow tie, Daniel looked into her eyes and asked, "Why did you say earlier that pussy is husband's?" Nguyen Mu smiled faintly. "Many men come in thinking $2 gets them more," she said simply. "But that is for a different kind of bath." She then mimicked a simple motion with her hand, indicating that most of the time, her role was limited to simple tasks, meant to keep things professional and avoid any misunderstandings. There was a knock at the door, signaling the end of their time together. With a final glance, Nguyen Mu finished dressing and prepared to lead Daniel out of the room. Everything had returned to normal, the moment passing without any further tension. "You?" she asked, as they stepped back into the hallway. "I use my mouth," she whispered softly as the door opened. "You'll come back, right? You liked it, didn't you?" The man smiled as he guided Daniel down the stairs. In the entrance of the Golden Buddha, Daniel passed a man who had just arrived. The man kept his hat pulled low, as if he didn't want to be recognized in such a place. As they passed, the man accidentally bumped into Daniel. He looked up to apologize, and Daniel realized he was staring into the face of Jennifer Dumble, the wife of Reverend Dumble. Daniel said nothing to acknowledge her, simply mumbled an apology and left. He walked to the stable, paid the boy who brought his horse, and mounted up. Reflecting on the night, Daniel thought about how he could have gone home earlier. His horse knew the way well, and when they arrived at Crescent City home, he rewarded the animal with an extra scoop of oats. Daniel's days soon became routine, and he found himself missing Merrily. She wasn't in the office to greet patients, and she wasn't there for him to share his thoughts with or to enjoy a meal together. The absence of her cheerful presence left a void, even as the waitresses at the local restaurant flirted with him openly. He missed her smile, the way she moved with grace, and the small moments they had shared. Patients even asked about her absence, often sighing when Daniel explained that she had gotten married. After Merrily's marriage, Daniel's life became repetitive. The work-home cycle felt endless, and without much to do in Benhurst besides the saloon or local churches, he struggled to find distractions. But the Catholic Church wasn't an option for him, and he didn't feel inclined to attend other services in town. One Monday evening, after having dinner at Eleanor's, Daniel decided to take a walk through the small town. But deep down, he knew where he was headed, the Golden Buddha. "Ah, you're back. You liked it?" Mu Tai greeted him warmly as Daniel approached the door. "I'd like a $5 bath with Nguyen Mu," Daniel said quietly, handing over the coin. As he walked upstairs, escorted by the same man as before, Daniel pondered how different Mu Tui's world was. He could never imagine offering his wife services, or even Merrily's, but this was a different culture, a different way of life. Just like before, Nguyen Mu and the other woman quickly entered with steaming pots of water. When she saw Daniel, Nguyen Mu smiled warmly. Nguyen Mu quickly removed the smile from her face and focused on preparing the bath for Daniel, filling the tub with steaming water. "He's paid for the $5 bath," the second man barked at her in their native language. Pho Tin Se, another woman, watched with frustration. She felt it was unfair. She believed she was more beautiful, with larger features and more traditional signs of maturity. But Nguyen Mu often got more attention, even more food, due to her marriage to Mu Tui. "It's because I speak French," Nguyen Mu quietly explained to Pho Tin Se, sensing her frustration. "Oh," Pho Tin Se nodded, understanding. "But I'll tell him you're skilled at bathing," Nguyen Mu added kindly. "Thank you," Pho Tin Se smiled, feeling a bit better. As Nguyen Mu began to help Daniel undress, she asked quietly, "What did my husband say when you paid for the bath?" "He said nothing, just showed me upstairs," Daniel replied. "He didn't suggest another one of the girls?" Nguyen Mu asked, her voice calm, though she hid her frustration. "No, he didn't," Daniel confirmed. Nguyen Mu smiled as she finished helping Daniel into the hot water, her focus on her task. She continued to bathe him carefully, making sure everything was just right. As she washed him, she remained gentle and respectful, her actions professional and smooth. After finishing, she helped Daniel relax, letting the warm water soothe him as she focused on making the experience as comfortable as possible. There was no need for words, just the quiet atmosphere of the bath. As they finished, Nguyen Mu smiled again, keeping the atmosphere light. She continued to help him dress before leading him back down the stairs, the visit ending on a calm and quiet note. Nguyen Mu focused on her task, ensuring Daniel was comfortable in the bath. She worked diligently, keeping the atmosphere calm and professional. There were no words exchanged as she carefully continued with the routine of bathing him, making sure to keep the process smooth and respectful. After completing the bath, Nguyen Mu called out for the second girl, Fo Tin Se, to bring a fresh flannel sheet. Fo Tin Se is also skilled in bathing, Nguyen Mu said in French, nodding toward the other girl. Fo Tin Se smiled warmly at Daniel, bowed politely, and left the room. Later that evening, Mu Tui questioned Nguyen Mu about why Daniel had specifically asked for her. "Why would he choose you over the other girls?" he mocked. "They are prettier, smarter, and work harder than you." Nguyen Mu remained calm and answered, "It's because I speak French. He came to give us a warning." She then shared a detail about an upcoming meeting, her tone steady as she relayed the information. "The sheriff will come and arrest everyone and send us back home." "Sheriff?" Mu Tui asked, his eyes wide with worry. Mu Tui was wanted for serious crimes in San Francisco and his home country. Here, he felt safe. No one knew him or his past. Ung Sin Dao, his business partner, agreed with Mu Tui. They feared that the sheriff and his deputy would search their building and find the girls. They would take the girls away, but he and Mu Tui had a plan. They would hide in their secret underground space. After the search ended, they would quietly leave town. "Denver, there are many places we could stay hidden," Ung Sin Dao suggested. "It is lucky my wife told us this," Mu Tui said proudly. The next day, while the girls were asleep, Mu Tui and Ung Sin Dao took all the money they had made since arriving in Benhurst from their safe. They hid the money in their underground space. Once the job was done, they woke the girls to start their daily tasks. At dinner, Ung Sin Dao said that Fo Tin Se would call out to customers at the door. Chin Pom would help customers up the stairs to the second or third floor. "Just remember, did I send the customer to the first room or the second?" Ung Sin Dao reminded. "And where will you be?" Nguyen Mu asked the men. "We have important work to do," Mu Tui answered, clearly upset that she asked. "Please be safe, dear husband," Nguyen Mu said, her worried eyes watching him. At 10 minutes to 9, Ung Sin Dao and Mu Tui hurried down to the basement. They opened the hatch and climbed down the rope ladder into the small space they had dug in the ground. They created this hiding spot when they first arrived in Benhurst for moments just like this, to stay safe and keep their money hidden. Ung Sin Dao pulled on the rope and closed the hatch, leaving them in darkness. They sat on cushions and waited for time to pass. Neither man noticed that they had left their bags behind in the cramped space. At 10 minutes past 9, Nguyen Mu came down the stairs, passed aboard Fo Tin Se and Chin Pom, and opened the basement door. She walked quietly down the stairs without making a sound. The large safe stood in a corner, open and empty. Even empty, it was very heavy. Nguyen Mu wrapped a rope around the safe and tied it to a beam. She used the rope to lift the heavy safe off the floor with surprising ease. She tied the rope to a support beam. Another rope lifted the heavy safe, making it hang just above the hatch. She fastened this rope to the same beam. Carefully, Nguyen Mu lowered the safe down to sit securely over the hatch. "Goodbye, my dear husband," Nguyen Mu thought with bitterness. "You left us to face our fate. Now I leave you to yours." "Where have you been?" Chin Pom asked when Nguyen Mu came out of the basement. Chin Pom covered her mouth and whispered, "The man who is not like us wants to talk to you." Nguyen Mu nodded and went to the room where Chin Pom had placed Jennifer Dumble. When she entered, Jennifer looked very upset. "I'm sorry," Nguyen Mu said, even though she knew the woman couldn't understand her. She quickly helped Jennifer with her clothes and guided her into the warm bath. "In the morning I will see Dr. Jordanaire. He will assist me," Nguyen Mu thought as she prepared herself. After learning about her husband's passing, Emily Burgess invited Annie Burgess, her sister-in-law, to move into their small home on Annunciation Street in New Orleans, Louisiana. Together, they focused on raising Anatole's daughter, Marilee. By the time Marilee turned 18, she realized that her mother and Aunt Annie were more than just sisters-in-law. She had seen them together often, sharing moments of closeness and affection. Sometimes she wondered quietly to herself if her mother missed her father. The only extra thing Emily allowed Annie was a subscription to the local newspaper, which Emily called a rag. Marilee enjoyed reading it too, despite her mother's complaints about the ink stains it left on their hands. In the paper, Marilee discovered exciting stories about wild frontiers. She imagined what it would be like to breathe in fresh pine air, feel soft snowfall, and hear the sounds of nature. In New Orleans, all she could smell was the swamp nearby. She had never seen snow, although winters could be quite chilly. It was hard to hear nature over the buzz of the city. Then, by chance, Marilee found the personal ads. Her eyes widened in excitement as she saw many men trying to catch her attention, each one hoping to impress her with their words. One article caught her eye. It shared news of a new discovery of gold and silver in Colorado. She read and reread an ad by William J. Benhurst III. It felt as though he was writing just for her from the Colorado Territory. "Mother, Aunt Annie," she called out. "Oh, we're just resting, dear, but we'll be right there," Aunt Annie called from the bedroom the two women shared. No, I'm coming to you," Marilee replied playfully. "No, Marilee, you must wait," Mother insisted. Neither woman seemed particularly impressed by the notice, but Emily nodded when Marilee said she would write to the young man. Now she stood on the train platform, waiting for the train to Benhurst, where she would meet her fiancé. She, Mother, and Aunt Annie chatted in French, their first language. Then the conductor announced it was time to board. A kind young man offered to carry her bag, but before Marilee could thank him, a rude man pushed in and ordered the young man to help her. He even handed the youth a nickel for his trouble. Marilee felt annoyed. Though she had only a few coins, she could handle her own bag. She told the pushy man as much. She settled by the window, hoping to enjoy the view of the beautiful countryside as the train headed west. But then a young man rudely sat next to her and started saying nice things. "No, thank you," Marilee replied, trying to sound as firm as possible. He left, but another young man took his place. She turned him down as well. A third man even put his arm around her shoulders, which she found quite forward. Then an older gentleman asked her in French if she wanted to be free of the troublemakers. She smiled with thanks when he introduced himself as her father and sent the young man away. She looked at the man closely now. He was handsome, with a bit of stubble on his square face. His eyes were a light brown, almost golden. He had broad shoulders, and his clothes were of high quality. Even his boots shone brightly. He didn't sit next to her but across the narrow aisle. They talked, and she learned he was also going to Colorado, near Denver. He was educated, a skilled dentist. His face had a scar under one eye, and she asked about it. She traced the faint line with her gloved finger. She was pleased to discover that her guardian had served in the military under the brave General Daigrepont. Her father, Corporal Anatole Burgess, had also served and had died under another brave leader. Unfortunately, Dr. Jordanaire did not know her father. In Lafayette, Louisiana, another young man showed interest in her. He even had the nerve to place his hand on her leg. But Marilee found that her guardian was not afraid to stand up for her, and he had the young man escorted away by the conductor. Dr. Daniel Jordanaire, offered to sit next to her, keeping other young men away. He smelled strong and clean, a warm scent that drew her in. As the hours passed, with the train rocking back and forth and the sound of the wheels clicking, Marilee drifted off to sleep. When she woke, her face was resting against him. She sat up and smiled. His eyes shone with warmth, and she felt a quick flutter of happiness looking at him. "Ah, Père," she said, "I need to use the washroom." "Of course, my dear," he replied in a deep, soothing voice. After using the washroom and tidying herself, she felt shy, noticing he had waited for her and guided her back to their seat, his arm feeling strong. When they arrived in Dallas, Marilee learned that her guardian was also her supporter. She felt very hungry, almost weak, and he bought her a meat pie. He made sure their bags were taken care of, too. She realized she would have been lost without her dear Pear to help and guide her. "Please don't stay in Denver, Pear," she urged as they got on the train to the busy town. "Come with me to Benhurst." "As if I could say no to you?" He smiled, and she felt that familiar flutter of happiness again. Even after traveling, he still had that strong, comforting scent. She leaned against him, feeling at ease by his side. In Denver, Daniel took charge again and arranged for them to ride the stagecoach the rest of the way to Benhurst. Her heart raced when he told the station master he would join her on the coach. He even made sure she sent a message about her arrival time to William Jacob Benhurst III before stopping in front of a barber shop. Marilee remembered her father's bushy mustache and asked Daniel to keep his mustache too. He agreed, just for her. In her hotel room, which Daniel had paid for, Marilee got ready for a wash. She securely locked the door and hung a cloth over the door handle to cover the keyhole. In the middle of the room was a wash basin Daniel had arranged for her. On a small table there was a cake of soap, a piece of linen, and a large sheet. Marilee happily took off her dress, which she had worn for days, along with her other clothing. Then she stepped into the warm water. Marilee gently lowered herself into the warm bath, letting out a sigh of relief as the heated water surrounded her. She lingered for a few moments, enjoying the soothing warmth on her skin after the long journey. After some time, she reached for the soap, using the harsh lye to scrub away the grime from the road. The water and soap left her skin slightly reddened, but she felt refreshed and clean. Once finished, Marilee stood and dried herself with a flannel sheet. As she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, she observed her figure. She was a petite woman, standing at 5'3", with a slightly rounded belly and full hips that made her appear ready for motherhood. Her legs were well-shaped and her complexion was fair. Her hair, a rich brunette, fell in waves, and her pale blue eyes complemented her features. Marilee's thoughts briefly turned to her future husband, William Jacob Benhurst III. She wondered if he would be pleased when they finally met. She was confident that he would find little to complain about with her appearance or personality. After dressing in a clean shift, Marilee lay down on the straw-filled mattress, still feeling the gentle rocking motion from the train ride, but soon sleep overtook her. The next leg of the journey by stagecoach was rough. The trail was rocky and uneven, making the ride uncomfortable. Once again, Marilee was thankful for the kindness of Dr. Daniel Jordanaire, who accompanied her on the trip. His humor lightened the mood when he joked, "No wonder they call these the Rockies," as the carriage bumped along. Dr. Jordanaire invited her to sit beside him, offering comfort during the bumpy ride. Marilee held onto a leather strap with one hand, while her other arm rested around his waist for support. He placed his strong arm around her, and for a brief moment, the discomfort of the journey seemed to fade. At some point, Marilee drifted off to sleep, waking to find herself leaning against him, her head resting on his shoulder and her body close to his. Despite the rough ride, she felt a sense of security in his presence. His scent filled the air, and she smiled into his warm eyes. "Ah, Pear, you are the best pillow to rest my head," she said playfully. "I think I will have a hard time resting without your breath near me," Daniel replied with a grin. Once again, warmth rushed through her. When they finally arrived in Benhurst, Daniel, as usual, stepped out of the stagecoach first to help her. She noticed William Jacob Benhurst III looking into the darkness of the coach. For a moment, disappointment crossed her mind. William was a short, round young man with slicked-back hair and clothes that were too tight for his figure. His boots were quite dirty. Marilee forced a smile and reached for Pear's hand. She missed the step and stumbled. Without her strong Pear, she would have fallen to the dusty ground. As it was, Pear's strong arm caught her. He quickly helped her up, and his hand rested firmly as he steadied her. Then Pear introduced her to William J. Benhurst III, who preferred to be called Billy, and William Jr., known as Will. She then introduced her peer, Dr. Daniel Jordanaire, but both boys quickly turned their attention to the doctor, excited to meet him. But Pear, sweet Pear, brought her back into the conversation by saying it was Marilee who had convinced him to come to Benhurst. They took a quick tour of Benhurst, and Billy pointed out different shops to her. One was a taxidermist. Merrily understood hunting's importance for providing food and managing animal populations. However, keeping any part of the animal as a trophy seemed strange to her. They passed a shop with cheerful, jingling music inside. Billy surprised her by talking about places where people could take baths. For a small fee, women would wash their customers. Billy also pointed out the saloons, saying that some of these places featured women who danced and entertained the men. "You seem to know a lot about this," Merrily said. Billy turned red. Thankfully, they arrived at the building Will wanted to show Dr. Jordanaire. She smiled when Daniel mentioned that she would be staying with him until she married Billy, William Jacob Benhurst III. Billy made her laugh when he joked that they would get married that very night. Then they went to a lovely restaurant and enjoyed buffalo meat and potatoes. Merrily quickly learned how to be a dental assistant and also how to help in an office. She kept track of each patient in a ledger, noting how much they had paid and if they had any balance left. However, her most important job was to make each patient feel welcome and appreciated. She smiled and chatted with everyone who came in and gathered information about their needs. When Dr. Jordanaire was ready, she guided them into the treatment room. Billy was always around. Merrily hoped he was just excited to have her in Benhurst and that he would calm down once they were married. "Otherwise, his constant presence might be too much for me," she shared with Pierre. Merrily found it strange that many of Dr. Jordanaire's patients sometimes made flirty comments and awkward attempts to win her over. Pierre frowned at this and even gently scolded the more persistent men. Still, Billy would grin proudly when they made these remarks in front of him, looking pleased with himself. The dress Pierre had bought for her was really beautiful, made of ivory silk and layers of chiffon. Merrily thought spending $12 was a lot, but Pierre didn't mind the expense. She promised to pay him back, but Pierre just smiled and told her she had already done enough. This was their home, he said, and she helped organize things and made changes to the design while it was being built. In honor of their old home, Pierre named it Crescent City. Inside, Merrily had her own bedroom right across the hall from Pierre's. Beulah, the housekeeper, took orders from Merrily and called her the lady of the house. For Merrily, this was the happiest life she had ever known. Her father, Anatole Burgess, had cherished her, calling her his little princess and making her laugh with tickles. The unfortunate Civil War had taken him away, and she had missed him dearly for many years. Now, her Père Daniel Jordanaire treated her just as kindly. He made sure her every wish was fulfilled, and it seemed money was no object when it came to her happiness. Finally, the day of her wedding arrived. Merrily left Crescent City in the Benhurst buggy, which had been freshly varnished and decorated with white ribbons. The 4 horses pulling it were also adorned with white ribbons. "Madame Burgess, your carriage is ready," Pierre joked, trying to lighten the mood. But Merrily noticed the tears in his eyes. He gently helped her into the back of the buggy, brushing off the stable boy, Caesar Washington, who had also come to help. He tied his horse to the back of the buggy and climbed in to sit beside her. Merrily leaned against her pair as the buggy traveled slowly toward the Redemption Baptist Church. She and her pair waved and greeted the people who watched them pass by. "If Billy won't marry you, I will," called out a young man. "If Billy doesn't, I'm next in line," her pair replied. In a small room, the dressmaker and her 2 daughters helped Merrily into her dress. It was a snug corset, followed by several layers of fabric, including a lacy shift and a bloomed skirt. Finally, they placed the ivory silk gown over everything. "I'll tell Reverend Dumble we're ready," one daughter said as she left the room. Now Merrily was alone, lost in her thoughts. Was this the right choice? She had traveled far to be here. Without Dr. Daniel Jordanaire and her dear pair, she might not have made it. The door opened and her pair entered the room. She looked at this kind-looking gentleman and tried to smile. "Dear pair, should I really do this?" Merrily asked softly, seeking guidance. "Many brides have wondered that same thing," he replied with a smile. "Even Annette, my own wife, asked her father those very words." "And where is your wife now?" Merrily asked, curious. "She is not important. Today is about you," Daniel replied gently. Merrily looked into his warm brown eyes and sensed a deep sadness behind them. She realized he had experienced pain. "You have been hurt," she whispered. Merrily stood and lightly touched Daniel's face. I never wanted to bring you such sadness, dear Peer, she said as her gloved finger brushed his mustache. Ah, but you have, he joked lightly. You've affected me deeply since the moment you said you belong to another. Merrily smiled at his words. She laughed when Daniel playfully nibbled her finger. Standing on her toes in her tight shoes, she kissed him softly. A warmth spread through her as his mustache brushed against her lips. Billy has never made me feel this way, she thought, but quickly set that thought aside. She turned to grab her bouquet of fresh flowers and linked her arm with his. Let's go, Peer, she said. Daniel shed tears during the ceremony. He cried freely as the minister announced that Billy and Merrily were now husband and wife, declaring that from this day forward, Merrily Burgess would be known as Mrs. William Jacob Benhurst III. Merrily's eyes were wet with tears. Even though her vision was blurry, she could see the smug satisfaction on her husband's face. There was a hint of amusement in his eyes as he looked at her friend Daniel. Daniel cried as the lovely young girl took her new husband's arm and walked out of the church. At the door, Merrily turned to glance at Daniel one last time. Then her husband led her away to Eleanor's, where the wedding feast awaited. After a delicious meal and many toasts to their happiness and health, her husband guided her to the carriage. Caesar Washington took the reins, and they headed to the Benhurst Ranch. Merrily was upset to find out they would be living with Billy's parents instead of having their own home. She learned this at the rehearsal dinner at the Benhurst Ranch. Will and Billy assured her that they would have the entire third floor of the big house and would be undisturbed. Will we have our own kitchen? Merrily asked. Meals will be cooked and eaten on the first floor, said Mrs. William J. Benhurst, Jr., a stout, serious woman. Norma Benhurst gave Merrily a sharp look as if daring her to complain. You will also help prepare these meals, the older woman said firmly. You don't have any servants? Merrily asked. And you will help with the laundry each day, Norma continued. One day the ranch will be yours and Billy's. You must learn to care for it now. President Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, Merrily quietly muttered. I guess that didn't apply to Benhurst wives? What did you say? Norma snapped back. Now Merrily leaned heavily against her new husband. Even in her drunken state, she hoped their stay at the Benhurst Ranch would be short. Thank you, Merrily said as Caesar helped her out of the carriage. Caesar looked surprised, but then smiled and bowed to her. He was taken aback because the lady and man of the house, along with their young son, rarely acknowledged him. They only spoke to him when they were upset, and the other helpers faced the same treatment. Welcome, Mrs., Caesar said. He tried not to laugh when Billy stumbled out of the wagon, barely keeping his balance. I'll take care of the horses now, Caesar said. Billy insisted, in a tipsy manner, that he would carry his bride over the threshold of their home. He stumbled as he carried her, almost dropping her and causing her to bang her head against the doorframe. You will not carry me up to our bedroom, Merrily said, clearly upset with her new husband. The wedding dress, which her father had spent $12 on, was quickly taken off as Billy grew frustrated with the many buttons. The layers beneath it also puzzled him. The girls on Main Street don't have so many layers, he said. Finally, she was fully revealed to him. He admired her figure. She had a nice shape, with a round belly and hips that hinted at future motherhood. Her legs were sturdy, and her feet were small and delicate. Billy stepped closer and hugged her. She felt a little uncomfortable at his touch. He leaned in to kiss her, but she stepped back, looking confused. Why are you kissing me like that? She asked, wiping his saliva from her lips. It's called French kissing, Billy explained. He reached to hug her again, and she stepped back until she felt the edge of the bed. I'm French, and I don't kiss like that, Merrily replied. When Billy took off his clothes, Merrily couldn't help but chuckle. His body was unusual and very pale. Do all of them look like that? She almost asked. Billy encouraged her to lie down on the bed. She did, sinking into the soft mattress. Billy joined her, pulling her close once more. Once again he kissed her, and when she opened her mouth to protest, he pushed his tongue inside. Merrily gasped in surprise. She could taste the dinner they had shared. Then he leaned down, kissing her chest. He was clumsy as he tried to align himself with her. Stop! Merrily cried out, feeling an intense pain. She felt a deep hurt, and despite her distress, Billy continued without noticing her discomfort. Billy and Marilee's first night as husband and wife was brief and awkward. Billy quickly finished and soon after fell asleep, leaving Marilee to quietly drift into sleep as well. The next morning, Marilee was startled awake by Norma Benhurst's stern voice. "Wake up, child," she commanded. Marilee, confused and still tired, exclaimed, "Aye! It's time to help with the morning meal," Norma insisted. Marilee, still upset, replied, "I was told we would not be disturbed in our room." "Except when it's time for your chores," Norma corrected firmly. Marilee demanded that Norma leave the room so she could dress in peace. Norma, not one to be easily dismissed, scoffed, saying she'd seen it all before. But Marilee stood her ground, insisting, "This is my room. Leave now, or you can make the meal yourself, madame." Billy, still in bed, watched the confrontation but said nothing. He lacked the courage to stand up to his mother for his new wife. Seeing she wouldn't win this battle, Norma finally left the room. Frustrated, Marilee turned to her husband and hissed, "I'll ask Pierre if we can stay in the apartment above the office. I won't have your mother barging into my room whenever she pleases." After dressing, Marilee headed downstairs, where Norma kept her busy all morning, helping Chloe, the house servant, prepare the meal. Marilee worked hard, but Norma only gave more orders, offering no praise. As they sat down to breakfast, Will, Billy's father, greeted Marilee warmly. "Good morning, my dear. You're looking lovely today." "Thank you, sir," Marilee replied politely, though still exhausted from the early morning chores. The rest of the day was no easier. Norma kept Marilee busy washing sheets, preparing lunch, and later helping with dinner. Marilee barely had a moment to herself. By the time evening came, she was exhausted. When she finally made her way back to the bedroom, Billy, barely acknowledging her tiredness, pressured her for intimacy. Thankfully, it didn't last long, and though it was less painful than the night before, it was still uncomfortable. Afterward, Billy quickly fell asleep, leaving Marilee to sigh and do the same. The next day followed much the same routine, with Norma finding endless chores for Marilee. Billy was no help, leaving early for work and only returning right before dinner. Marilee realized that if Billy wouldn't stand up to his mother, she would have to take matters into her own hands. After an awkward moment with Billy, Marilee waited for him to roll over and fall asleep. Once he did, she looked for her sewing bag, which her friend had brought to the Benhurst home the day before the wedding. She found the black thread and got to work, sewing quietly until she, too, drifted off to sleep. Suddenly, a loud noise woke Marilee. With a smile, she saw her mother-in-law, Norma, on the floor. Marilee got out of bed, put on her dress, and slipped into her shoes. "I could have hurt myself," Norma said, sounding annoyed. "Maybe it would help to knock before you come in," Marilee replied. "It's a little impolite to walk in without warning." Norma narrowed her eyes but got up from the floor. As she looked at the doorway, the oil lamp in the hall lit the scene. She noticed something at ankle height, a thin line of black thread Marilee had stretched across the door. "Look at that," Marilee said with a smile. "It looks like a spider made a web." Norma moved closer to the door as Marilee stepped over the thread. "Be careful," Marilee warned playfully. "We wouldn't want any accidents." Throughout the day, Norma kept Marilee busy with chores. Although Chloe and Dolly helped where they could, it seemed Norma was determined that Marilee would do most of the work around the home. By the time her father-in-law and husband returned home, Marilee was very tired. She served them dinner and followed Billy up the stairs to their room. As they got ready for bed, Billy bragged about the many women he had spent time with before they got married. Marilee looked at him with disappointment. "Really, Billy? You think that's something to be proud of?" she asked, her voice heavy with disapproval. Dressed for bed, Marilee pointed to herself. "I wouldn't need to pay for attention like that," she said, shaking her head. She climbed into bed, indicating there was no need for such behavior. Billy, however, didn't seem to notice her disapproval and acted as if nothing was wrong. Marilee felt frustrated as she thought about his past experiences. After a restless night, morning came, and Norma checked the doorway carefully. There was no sign on the door, so she swung it open with force. "Aye!" Norma shouted as the cup of water Marilee had balanced on top of the door tipped over, soaking her head with cold water. The cup fell to the ground, hitting Norma on the head. Merrily happily smiled as she got dressed. "Dear mother-in-law, you really should knock," she said as she stepped out of the room. In the kitchen, Merrily and Chloe were making drop biscuits using lard. Chloe looked at Merrily with doubt, but agreed that Merrily could have a little lard after dinner. Billy noticed that Merrily appeared to be in a good mood that evening. He didn't ask why, and if he had, she would have pointed to the small bit of lard on a paper beside her bed. A loud noise and then a crash woke Merrily the next morning. She got dressed and opened the door. Norma was lying on the floor again, but this time it was outside the bedroom. Merrily stepped over the lard she had spread on the wooden floor. Without saying a word to the confused Norma, she headed downstairs. "You could have hurt me," Norma said angrily when she finally made it into the kitchen. "Well, I'm trying my best," Merrily replied with annoyance, "but you are just being so stubborn." Chloe knew that if she laughed, Mrs. Benhurst might find a reason to cut her pay. So she focused on whisking the eggs. With her back turned to the angry woman, she silently chuckled as she mixed. "By the way, I plan to ride into town this morning," Merrily added. "You have many chores to finish," Norma protested. "Mother-in-law, I wasn't asking for your permission," Merrily said. "I was letting you know. I will be riding into town today." "And what about the laundry?" Norma shouted. "You managed before I married your son," Merrily pointed out. "You can manage today. You will stay and finish the laundry if there's time," Norma hissed. "Norma, once more, I am not seeking your approval," Merrily said. "I am not your servant. I am your daughter-in-law." Pear had brought Missy, Merrily's horse from Crescent City, to the Benhurst Ranch's stable. Caesar quickly saddled the horse when she asked him to. He smiled when she thanked him. Inside the house, Dolly and Chloe worked hard while Norma yelled at them. "I hope Mrs. Merrily stands up for herself," Chloe whispered to Dolly. "Amen to that," Dolly replied quietly as they scrubbed the sheets with strong soap. In his office, Dr. Jordanaire was treating a patient. He could hear whispers from those waiting outside. The voices grew louder when someone new arrived. He smiled. The voice belonged to a female patient. The people in the room were rough around the edges, but a woman could bring out both the best and the worst in them. "Here, have some whiskey. Swish it around in your mouth a couple of times a day," he said before stepping into the outer office. "Pear, oh dear Pear," Merrily greeted the doctor warmly and wrapped her arms around him. "Oh, my dear sweet Merrily," he said, his happiness clear. Earlier, Dr. Jordanaire had written 2 letters for Nguyen Mu. The small woman had asked for his help to get to Paris, France. The first letter was for the station master in Denver, explaining that Nguyen Mu needed to travel to New York City. The second letter was for a travel company in New York, asking to book a first-class ticket to Paris. "What about your husband?" Daniel asked the small woman. "He will join me soon," Nguyen Mu replied. She thanked Daniel in her own way, showing her appreciation very openly. Then, as she got ready to leave, she suggested, "You could come with me. What keeps you here?" He shook his head, knowing nothing tied him to this small Colorado town, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. Daniel helped Nguyen Mu onto the stagecoach, placed her heavy trunks on the roof, and watched another woman leave his life. "Stop it," he told himself. "She is not yours, just like Merrily is not yours." But he couldn't help thinking about Merrily's sweet face, her joyful laughter and kind spirit. In the outer office, Merrily kissed him with quick, light pecks on the lips. Her warmth surrounded him as he held her close. To Daniel, seeing Merrily felt like finding an oasis in a vast desert. Without her, he felt empty. For Merrily, seeing the distinguished man made her heart race. His presence filled her with a joy that came from deep within. Merrily chatted happily in French about how much she had missed him and how deeply she cared for him. He invited her into his private office and sat her in the patient's chair. "And how is your marriage?" he asked. Merrily scoffed, brushing off the question. "Seriously, how is being with William Jacob Benhurst III?" Daniel asked quietly. Again, speaking in French in case someone was listening, Merrily made clear her discontent with her mother-in-law's demands for work. Then she expressed her disappointment about the lack of affection from her young husband. "Just do what you need to and then go to sleep," Merrily said bluntly. Suddenly, she noticed Daniel turning red. She giggled and covered her mouth with her hand. Then she gently touched his arm. "Oh, am I embarrassing you?" she teased. Yes, it's not something two unmarried people should talk about," he replied. "Well, I am married," she pointed out. "And you were married, so we aren't two unmarried people." "You cheeky girl," he smiled, clearly amused. "That's not at all what I meant, and you know it." After a few more minutes, he reminded her that he had patients waiting. "The upstairs apartment?" she asked hopefully. "It belongs to you. It always has," he assured her. She stood up on her toes and gave him a kiss. As she held him, their lips connected softly. She felt a rush of emotion, warmth spreading through her. Merrily pulled away and noticed his blushing face. Then she picked up her handbag. "Thank you, dear Pear," she said quietly. "Thank you, dear Merrily," he replied, a bit flustered. Leaving Pear's office, Merrily walked across the dusty path to the Main Street saloon. Inside, she saw Billy, her husband of only a few weeks, sitting at a table with a Mexican girl who was laughing and chatting with him. Merrily knew she should feel angry, but she didn't. Instead, she turned and left the saloon. She remembered that Eleanor's had a good lunch and she was looking forward to it. Dolly and Chloe were happy to see her return. Chloe whispered as they started to prepare their evening meal. "Do you need any more lard?" "Yes, please," Merrily smiled back. After dinner, Billy and Will wanted to play some card games. But Norma was not in the mood for games. She had many things to say to her husband regarding their stubborn daughter-in-law. Merrily also had some words for her young husband. Billy was surprised and upset that they would be leaving the comfort of Benhurst Ranch. Here, he was treated like a master. Here, he was expected to do nothing. Here at Benhurst Ranch, his mother cared for him deeply. His father gave him a lot of freedom. "Billy, it is okay," Merrily said with a sigh. "You do not need to leave Benhurst Ranch." "Thank you," Billy replied. "Many married couples do not sleep in the same bed," Merrily added. She poked her finger into Billy's chest. "But remember, Mr. Benhurst, I will be sleeping in the room above my father's office," she told him. "And it is right across from the saloon where you like to have lunch," Merrily said without smiling. What?" Billy stammered. "After talking with my father, I walked over to the saloon, and who did I see but Marissa sitting around?" Merrily asked, her light blue eyes growing serious. The next morning, Norma checked carefully. The floor was not slippery. The door was closed tightly. There were no obstacles in the way. Norma thought. Maybe her father did remind her that she is a guest in my home. I should let her see her father more often. She grabbed the doorknob and tried to turn it. Her hand moved, but the knob did not turn. She tried again in the other direction, but her hand slid along the smooth knob, failing to turn. She used both hands, but again, it was no use. "You stubborn little girl!" Norma shouted at the door. "Billy, I think this is for you, dear husband," Merrily called from the other side of the door. "What?" Billy asked sleepily. "Yes, something about a child," Merrily responded. "Open this door right now, Merrily Benhurst," Norma yelled, banging on the door. Downstairs, Will sighed heavily. His wife had many complaints about their new daughter-in-law. He had been happy when he saw Billy moving away from bad habits. Will was pleased that Billy had chosen such a lovely girl like Merrily Burgess. She was well-spoken, seemed smart, and appeared to come from a good family. Now, with his wife's complaints filling his mind, Will was beginning to wish Billy had picked one of the dressmaker's daughters instead. A long-distance romance only shows so much of a person's true character. Upstairs, Norma frowned severely when the door to Billy's room opened. "Ah, you've learned to knock," Merrily smiled sweetly. "That needs to be cleaned right away," Norma said sharply, pointing at the door handle. "Then you should get busy with that," Merrily replied as she walked past her irritated mother-in-law. Norma found plenty for Merrily to do that day. Knowing it was her last day of service, Merrily handled the tasks with a cheerful smile that annoyed Norma. As they prepared dinner, Chloe watched closely as Merrily sprinkled cayenne pepper on 3 of the drop biscuits. Her eyes widened as Merrily placed those biscuits onto Mrs. After Will said the blessing for the meal, Merrily nudged her husband. Billy acted like he didn't notice. "Ouch!" Billy grunted as Merrily's shoe lightly jabbed his shin. Norma gasped as she felt a sudden heat in her throat. Merrily smiled kindly as Norma hurriedly drank her milk. Merrily nudged Billy again. When he didn't respond, she gently kicked him once more. "Come on, Merrily," Billy shouted. "Say something or I will," Merrily replied firmly. "Say what?" Will asked. Billy stayed silent. Merrily frowned at him, then sighed. Norma's gasp did not change her expression. "Fine, you weak child," Merrily sighed. "Will, Mr. Benhurst, Mrs. Benhurst, I am going back to the apartment above my dad's office," she announced. She glared once more at the uneasy Billy. "It's up to my husband if he wants to come with me," she said. "What? But why? I thought we—" Will stammered. "You will not keep me from leaving," Norma said angrily. "Oh, I will be leaving," Merrily snapped. She stood up from her seat. "You have made my time here very hard," she accused her mother-in-law. "I knew you didn't have the strength." Norma mocked, feeling pleased. "I've had enough strength to keep my cool, dear mother-in-law," Merrily said sharply. "Don't push me any further." Merrily walked toward the stairs. "I'm going now to pack. Billy, I won't make you leave just as you won't make me stay," Merrily announced. "Should have married that Polly," Will muttered. "Mom, Dad." Billy finally spoke and stood up. Merrily didn't pay much attention to the shouting between the three Benhursts. She focused on carefully folding her clothes and putting them into the nice bags her dad had given her. Anything from Billy or Will and Norma, she set aside. She didn't want to feel tied to them. She was surprised when a quiet Billy came into their bedroom and started packing his own clothes into a trunk. They worked in silence until Merrily's closet was empty. "Hey, the brush and comb set," Billy finally said, pointing. Merrily looked at the silver comb and the brush her husband had given her on their wedding day. She smiled softly. "I plan to use them in the morning," she said, not telling the whole truth. "Then I would pack them." "Oh," was his simple reply. They lay down together in bed. "That girl Marissa, Billy started, trying to think of something to say. "Billy, it doesn't matter," Merrily said with a heavy sigh. She looked at him. In the soft light, his face seemed pale and oddly shaped. She sighed again. "It doesn't matter," she repeated, "and that really bothers me, that I don't care." "Well, I think you should care," he argued. "Billy, just know that if you look for happiness with those types of women, you won't find it here with me," Merrily warned. In the morning, Merrily giggled. She had not set any traps for Norma, but Norma was as jumpy as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Merrily watched as Norma stepped carefully, looked around, then took another step. It took nearly a full minute for her to move from the door to the bed. Then, just as Norma reached out to wake Merrily, Merrily struck out playfully. "Ha!" Merrily yelled as she hit her mother-in-law's face with a soft pillow. Norma's scream echoed through the house. 1 floor below, Will sighed heavily. Whatever Merrily had done, he was sure he would pay for it later. Merrily dressed and followed her still annoyed mother-in-law down the stairs. She and Chloe worked well together to prepare the morning meal, while Norma found plenty to complain about. "I will miss you a lot, Mrs. Benhurst," Chloe told her. "I will miss you too," Merrily said, "and I feel bad leaving you behind." Merrily brought out breakfast plates. She served her father-in-law first, then her husband, and then her mother-in-law. She almost laughed when Norma asked Billy to switch plates with her. "Billy, did you bring our bags down?" she asked. No, I thought," Billy stammered. "Billy, you usually eat and then hurry to the office," Merrily said calmly. Underneath her calm voice, Billy could hear the irritation in his wife's tone. She scooped some potatoes with her fork. "This morning, before you go to the office, please make sure the bags are in the carriage," Merrily said. It was not a request. Billy nodded. "Oh no, you will not be using our carriage," Norma said firmly. "Mr. Benhurst?" Merrily said calmly. "The carriage?" Well, you see," Will stammered. "The mayor of Benhurst, and you can't stand up to her?" Merrily asked with a heavy tone. "Now listen here," Will snapped. "It's fine," Merrily sighed. "I'll bring what my horse can carry." "Who's that?" Norma asked sharply. "My horse, the one my father gave me," Merrily replied. "You have no claim to her." "Use the carriage, child," Will said, looking nervously at his wife. "Thank you, sir," Merrily replied politely. That evening, after a long and awkward day at the office where father and son avoided talking, Billy almost headed toward Benhurst Ranch. But then he remembered he had a new home. He took the back stairs to reach the apartment. Merrily greeted him happily, even giving him a gentle kiss. She asked about his day at the office while finishing their dinner. "Shall we say a blessing, dear husband?" Merrily asked. Billy said a blessing and they ate. After dinner, Billy tried to teach his wife how to play poker, 5-card draw. She quickly learned how to play the game and beat him several times. "I hope you don't gamble, you would definitely lose," Merrily said. "I'm just letting you win," Billy replied, not telling the truth. He then taught her how to play 7-card stud. She understood it since the suits were the same as in 5-card draw. "And if I don't like the cards I get, I can just fold, right?" Merrily asked. "Yes, but you need to put in some of your things to get cards, so you lose what you've put in," Billy explained. Once again, she beat him easily. They played for pebbles, and there were plenty of stones scattered around. "Dear husband, if you gamble, only bet what you can easily lose," Merrily said as she gathered up the pebbles. That evening she was very loving. After a brief moment together, she cuddled with him, which made Billy feel good. "I love you," he whispered. "That's nice to hear, dear Billy," she said, gently patting his face. She woke up early, made breakfast, then kissed Billy and wished him a good day. Merrily brushed her long brown hair, put on a nice dress, and went down to the office. "Good morning, dear Daniel," Merrily happily greeted as he unlocked the front door. "Good. Are you going to be my helper again?" Daniel asked cheerfully. "Of course, I want to help with my apartment," she explained. "You don't need to pay for that. The apartment is yours," he said, taking her small hands in his large ones. "I know, but I want to do this, dear Daniel," she replied. She stood on her toes and gave him a gentle kiss. She looked happily into his eyes before skipping back to her desk. Daniel was in his office getting ready when he noticed something. She had called him Daniel instead of her usual name for him. He wondered about the change, but soon got busy and didn't think about it too much. When he was about to leave, she gave him another soft kiss. He stepped out into the warm evening and locked the door while she went back upstairs to her apartment. Merrily made dinner and waited for Billy to come home. By 8 o'clock, he still wasn't there, so she ate the no-cold ham and potatoes. At 9, she got ready for bed. At 11 o'clock, a very drunk and upset Billy came home. His words were slurred and hard to understand, but Merrily figured out that he had lost nearly $70 at a local bar that night. "While I waited at home for you, you wasted," she exclaimed. In a fit of anger fueled by the alcohol, he struck her face. His anger was really aimed at himself for being tricked by some players at the game that night. Billy felt upset with himself, but it was easier to take his frustration out on Merrily. You! Merrily stammered, clearly shocked. Then she started to cry. Seeing her tears made any satisfaction Billy had from being harsh quickly fade away. The next morning, Merrily greeted Daniel with a gentle kiss. While he tidied up his office, she asked if she could pose a question. "Well, I think you just did," he joked with a smile. She smiled back softly. "Please sit down," Daniel said as he moved his chair closer to hers. "Daniel, I'm not a child," Merrily said quietly. "You're right. I suppose you're not," Daniel replied. "Daniel, do you think you could ever hurt your wife?" Merrily asked. Daniel admitted that Annette sometimes upset him with her careless words or how she spent money, but his response was firm. "No, my dear Merrily, even when she faced difficult times, I have never harmed Annette," Daniel assured her. "I may have felt angry, but violence is not the answer." "Thank you, Daniel," Merrily said softly. She stood up, leaned in, and gave him a gentle kiss that lingered just a bit too long. When she pulled back, she playfully messed up his hair and laughed when he jokingly tapped her side. Soon, 2 friends brought in a third man who had fallen from the roof of his stable and hurt his leg. Merrily couldn't help but cry when she heard the man's painful cries as Daniel worked to help him. The injured man even managed to smile at the sight of her tears. "It looks like you're feeling worse than I am," he said with a groan. "At least the skin is okay," Daniel commented as he carefully wrapped the man's leg with bandages and plaster. As he prepared the plaster, he thought briefly about Nguyen Mu, wondering if she had reached New York City or was already on a ship to Paris. "Come back in about 6 weeks, we'll check on it," Daniel instructed. Merrily wrote down the man's details and showed him the bill for the service. "Wow!" the man exclaimed. "At least if a horse breaks a leg, you can put it out of its misery." "Those kinds of services cost extra, Mr. Tisdale," Merrily replied, her face unreadable. "Charlie, you penny pincher, just pay the lady," one of the man's friends chimed in. "And don't forget the tooth extraction from May 20th, Marilee continued, flipping back through her records. "You better pay before she flips back even more pages," another friend of Charlie said, chuckling. "Porter, is that you here?" Marilee asked kindly. "Charlie, I'm tempted to break the other leg, you hear?" John Porter laughed as he finished paying his bill. "You don't know me. You've never seen me before," the third man said quickly to Marilee. "No, I haven't seen you before, Mr. Michaels," Marilee agreed. Marilee put the collected money into a heavy box and locked it. With a sturdy bang, she shut the desk drawer and welcomed a young girl who walked into the office. Marilee's Spanish was getting better, and she understood that the girl had a painful wisdom tooth that was breaking through the gum. "Marilee, do you have any money?" Billy shouted as he entered the office. "Yes, I have 70. Oh, wait, I made a mistake. My husband foolishly lost that money," Marilee said, her expression darkening. "Do you have any money or not?" Billy asked sharply. "None," Marilee replied firmly. "What? You mean Dr. Danny doesn't pay you for working here?" Billy yelled. "He pays me. We have a place to live, Billy. Did you forget that?" Marilee retorted. "Now please stop yelling. This is a business." "How much do you need, Billy?" Daniel asked softly. "About $10, Billy replied hopefully. "I can give you 2. Try to manage with that," Daniel said quietly, handing him 2 coins. As soon as her husband left, Marilee retrieved $2 coins from her purse. After the girl left, she stormed into the inner office and pushed the coins into Daniel's hand. "My husband needs to learn to live within our means," she said firmly. "Daniel, my dear, you must not do that again. Do you understand?" He looked at her with a smile. He took the coins and put them in his pocket. "Really? You're telling me what to do?" he asked, amusement clear in his voice. "Yes," she laughed, playfully tapping him on the chest. "Be careful, or I might give you more orders." As evening approached, Daniel wished her a good night. Marilee stood on her toes and gave him a light kiss before heading to their apartment. That evening, she cooked a meal. She took what she had prepared the night before, lit the stove, and warmed it up. Billy could either make his own meal, or, if he apologized, she would reheat some ham and potatoes for him. At 8:30, Marilee set aside the Bible she had been reading by the flickering lamp, turned down the flame, and prepared for bed. It was close to 11 o'clock when Billy finally arrived in the bedroom. Marilee let out a terrified scream. Her husband wasn't alone. 2 men stood beside him, grinning as they looked at her, still cowering beneath the sheets. The evening had been unusually warm, and she had discarded her nightgown in an attempt to stay cool. "Marilee," Billy slurred, clearly drunk and unsteady. "I lost again. Get out! All of you, get out!" Marilee screamed, her voice full of anger and fear. "He lost real bad," one of the men chuckled. "And they saw you and I said they could have you," Billy mumbled, tears forming in his eyes. "What? Are you out of your mind? This is madness!" Marilee shouted, horrified. The 2 men snickered, their eyes fixed on her as she sat up in bed. The sheets slipped, exposing her, but she quickly tried to cover herself again. "Clem's going first," said the taller man, pushing the other forward. "Do you not hear me?" Marilee yelled, trying to shield herself with the blankets. But Clem pulled the sheets away and the men leered at her. The other man dragged Billy out of the room, leaving Marilee feeling completely exposed and defenseless. As Clem moved toward the bed, Marilee tried to escape, but he grabbed her and pushed her down. She struggled to break free but couldn't. Overwhelmed and in pain, she fought back with her words. "Is this all you can do?" she spat out, trying to maintain some sense of control. "The least you could do is figure out what you're doing." Clem paid no attention to her words. He finished quickly and, grinning foolishly, left the room. The second man entered, and Marilee braced herself. Despite the horrible situation, she used her sharp tongue to mask her fear. "Your mother must be proud," she hissed. The man responded with a cruel laugh before leaving as well. When the men were gone, Marilee sat up, shaken but defiant. She stormed out of the room, finding Billy outside. Her voice filled with contempt as she said, "You coward." Billy stood there, ashamed and unable to meet her eyes. With a groan, he felt overwhelmed. "You make me sick," Marilee said, glaring at him. She quickly lifted her foot and kicked him. Billy cried out in pain and fell to the floor of their small kitchen. Merrily looked at him and then went to the bedroom, closing the door behind her. The next morning, Merrily saw that Billy had slept on the small couch. She filled a cup with cold water, walked to the sofa, and splashed it on his face. "What? Why did you do that?" Billy mumbled, his head aching from the night before. "I packed my things. I'm moving to Crescent City," she told him. "You can take your things and go to Benhurst Ranch," Merrily added with anger. She grabbed her 3 bags and walked to the stairs leading out of the apartment. At the door, she took one last look at Billy. "Goodbye, Mr. William Jacob Benhurst III, she said with disdain. Daniel walked in just after Merrily had settled in the next room. Seeing his kind face made Merrily break down in tears, something she had held back the evening before. After hearing what she had been through, Daniel insisted she leave with him to Crescent City. She pointed to her bags. "There was never any question of where I would go," she said. In the mayor's office, Will noticed his son's tired look. Billy looked around, checked that they were alone, and sighed. "Spit it out. I'm not going to sit here and play games," Will said sharply. Billy gave a simple story, only admitting to losing some money over the last couple of days. Will listened, his face turning red. "So that $20 advance I gave you yesterday?" he asked angrily. "I had some good cards, just needed a couple more," Billy replied. "What did Merrily say about all this?" Will asked. "She said I need to go back to Benhurst Ranch," Billy mumbled. "Well, what if I told you that you can't go back?" Will replied. "What if I said it's time to grow up?" "Then where am I supposed to go?" Billy asked, confused. "Polly McCall runs that boarding house over on Clare," Will said. Will then called out to Pepe, a young man who often looked for work. Pepe came in holding his cap. "Go to Polly's and see if you can get a room for a month," Will instructed, sliding a few dollars across his desk. "Yes, Mayor," Pepe said, quickly leaving the office. "And stay away from the Golden Nugget," Will warned his son. Will stood up. Billy looked up from his desk. "Where are you going?" Billy asked. "Out," Will replied sharply. "Anywhere but here." He paused at the door to check that his gun was secure in its holster. He usually kept the heavy pistol hidden in his desk drawer. Satisfied, he glanced back at his son. "I'm tired of seeing you, boy," he said. "All those books and classes didn't help much." Pepe caught up with him and told Will that Polly would rent a room for Billy. The rather large woman hadn't told Pepe, but the room would be next to hers. "All right, get your cousin," Will said, handing Pepe some coins. "You both go to Doc Jordanair's and gather Billy's things, okay?" "Yes, Mayor," Pepe agreed and hurried off. "That boy makes me tired just watching him," Will chuckled. That evening, Beulah welcomed Merrily with a warm hug. She had Merrily sit in the kitchen and share her thoughts on marriage. Beulah laughed as Merrily spoke about how disappointing her experience had been. "Men always rush into things, then they rush to finish," Beulah laughed knowingly. As Daniel ate his meal, he admired the lovely Merrily enjoying her dinner. She felt his gaze and looked up, smiling at him. They reached across the table briefly, touching fingers, then went back to eating. Outside their separate rooms, Merrily stood on her toes. Daniel wrapped his arms around her waist and leaned down. They shared a gentle kiss. Then, a bit reluctantly, he let her back down. She pulled her arms from around his neck. "Sleep well, my Merrily," he said. "Sleep well, dear Daniel," she whispered. She touched his face, then turned to open her door. Daniel stayed in the hallway until the door quietly closed. Then he turned and went down the stairs. Inside the Golden Nugget, Clem and Sam were looking through the pockets of some new players. A newcomer, clearly tipsy, wobbled over to the table. He sat down heavily, placing a handful of coins in front of him, then nodded politely and started with a $5 bet. Sam dealt the cards and raised the bet by another $5. The newcomer matched the raise and asked for 2 new cards. After another raise, he called again. The newcomer showed 2 pairs, sixes and knaves. "Woo, thought you had it there, partner," Sam said with a friendly smile as he revealed a full house. "The same hand you had last game," Dr. Jordanair said calmly, now sounding clear-headed. "What?" Clem stammered. "And Clem had the 3 nines he's showing now," Dr. Jordanair added. Clem glanced at Sam for direction. The larger man watched Daniel with a serious look. "What are you saying, friend?" Sam asked. His hand slowly moved towards his side. Clem looked at Sam and then at the new player. I'm saying, may God have mercy on your souls, Daniel said. Daniel's first shot hit Sam just above his right eye. Clem fell back when Daniel's second shot hit his chest. Daniel took only his coins from the table. No one stopped Daniel as he walked to the saloon door. After leaving, Daniel got on his horse and rode calmly to Crescent City. The next morning, Beulah and Merrily tried to make huevos rancheros like the ones served at the Main Street Saloon for breakfast. Daniel thought the saloon's breakfast was better, but he complimented the two women for a good meal. Then he and Merrily rode to Benhurst to start their workday. The third patient of the day told Merrily what had happened to Sam and Clem. The patient had been there the night before and saw everything. Did you really do that for me? Merrily asked, stepping into the inner office. Watch it, Dr. Jordanair yelled. You almost made me lose my focus. Did you? Merrily pressed. How could I? Daniel replied. You saw me go to my room. Unless they were with me, there's no way I could have done that. Sitting at her desk, Merrily felt tears welling up. Daniel had acted when her husband should have. Instead of feeling jealous about her, her husband should have stood up to those two men. The patient came out ready to pay Merrily. Daniel entered the outer office looking upset. Listen, when I'm with a patient, unless I call for you, stay outside, Daniel said sternly. Merrily pulled Daniel down by his tie and gave him a quick kiss, making the men in the outer office chuckle. Just wait until I tell Billy, one man joked. Go ahead, Merrily smiled, her cheeks turning red. The next day, Merrily felt the burden of being a woman. She was relieved. She worried she might be expecting a child from Billy or worse, from Sam or Clem. She carefully placed a piece of gauze on herself and tried to keep a cheerful face as she and Beulah prepared breakfast. As Merrily and Daniel got their office ready for their first patient, William J. Benhurst, Jr. thought about whether to send Pepe to find Billy or just enjoy the quiet morning. There was no peace at home. Norma was still upset with Merrily for being headstrong and leaving so suddenly. He hadn't told Norma that Billy and Merrily were now living apart. The sun was high in the sky when a smiling Billy finally showed up. He had overslept, resting against the large figure of Polly. Polly had a fuller figure, with a round belly and large frame. She wasn't much more impressed with Billy's awkward attempts at intimacy than Merrily had been, so she decided to teach Billy how to approach things differently, showing him how to be gentle and take his time. They had practiced a few times already, and Polly had promised they would continue after the evening meal. She even kissed him with enthusiasm at the door before parting. By the way, you know who Sam and Clem are? Will asked Billy casually. Billy, nervous, replied, Yeah, I know them. Will continued, Seems like they were caught cheating the wrong man last night. One of them had the same hand, 3 kings and 2 queens, too many times for it to be a coincidence. So the sheriff took them in? Billy asked, more interested in whether his money might be returned. However, he was also uneasy, knowing Sam and Clem had been with his wife Merrily with his full permission. He feared they might use that against him later. Will gave Billy a stern look. The undertaker took care of them, he said, leaving no doubt about their fate. Before walking out, Will made a parting comment. Seems Dr. Jordanair did what you should have done instead of losing your dignity at the card table. Billy flushed with anger, but his father's words stayed with him. Meanwhile, Merrily was busy at the office, going through the financial ledgers for the month. Mr. Robertson, the bank manager, had provided a statement for the deposits made while she had been working hard at Benhurst Ranch. Everything adding up? Daniel asked, amused as he watched her concentrate. Merrily smiled, inviting him into the inner office. After a pause, she hesitantly asked, Daniel, have you ever heard of a French kiss? Yes, I have, he answered. Have you ever done it? She asked, faltering slightly. Daniel nodded, smiling. Yes, Merrily. I was married to Annette for a few years. Would you? Could you? Merrily began, but didn't finish. Without hesitation, Daniel playfully pulled her onto his lap. His mustache brushed against her lips, making her squeal with surprise. Unlike Billy's clumsy attempts, Daniel's kiss was gentle and warm, bringing a smile to Merrily's face. It was a kiss filled with feeling, a kiss full of hope. He then gently took her tongue into his mouth and she sighed softly. One of his arms wrapped around her waist while the other glided lightly on her arm. He held her close, his hand resting at her back and the other brushing against her shoulder. "Oh my," was all Merrily could think to say when Daniel finally pulled away. "I must admit I've wanted to do that since I first saw you at the train station," Daniel quietly said. Her fingers ran lightly across his face, taking in his strong features. She looked deep into his eyes before leaning in to kiss him again. "And I wish you had, before my silly marriage to Billy," she whispered. Suddenly a strained voice called out, "Is the doctor in? I need help." "Oh no!" Merrily gasped and quickly got off of Daniel's lap. "How did you get hurt?" Daniel asked as she hurried into the outer office. "Practicing my aim," the man said sheepishly. "Next time, try without live ammo," Daniel replied, noticing the man's injured arm. "I guess I didn't think of that," the man admitted. Merrily closed the ledger with satisfaction. Just as she and Daniel were about to share another kiss, another patient walked in. This one wouldn't say what was wrong. "It burns badly when I go to the bathroom," the man said to Daniel. Later that night, outside Daniel's room, Merrily stood on her toes and kissed him, inviting him in. They kissed softly, enjoying the moment together. Daniel held her close, their chests pressing together. After a moment, she gently pulled away and returned to her own room. That night, she dreamed of being with Daniel. She thought about the differences between her past partners. When she felt ready, Merrily approached Daniel's room again, kissing him with excitement. She paused for a moment and looked into his eyes. "Daniel, I don't want to be alone tonight. Your bed is big enough for both of us," she said softly. She opened the door to his room, stepping inside. His room was rugged and full of character, with a bed, a table, a washing bin, and a wardrobe. A small chair and a bookshelf filled with medical books filled the space. An oil lamp cast a warm light around the room. "Merrily, are you sure about this?" Daniel asked as she started to loosen her gown. At the sight of her, Daniel stopped questioning as he helped her take off her gown and placed it on the chair. Daniel gently embraced Merrily, holding her close as he kissed her with genuine affection. Their connection deepened, and as they kissed, Merrily playfully interrupted him, her happiness evident. "Oh, Daniel," Merrily exclaimed with joy, filled with excitement in the moment. As they shared their warmth, skin to skin, the closeness between them was undeniable. Daniel eased her onto the soft bed, their lips meeting again and again. He tenderly kissed her shoulders and neck, his gentle touch bringing her comfort and joy. Merrily's heart swelled as Daniel's kisses moved lovingly across her body. His touch was caring, and he made her feel cherished. As he kissed her, she sighed in contentment, enjoying every moment of their closeness. Together they found peace in each other's arms, sharing a quiet connection that brought them both comfort. Their time together was filled with mutual care and affection. Later, as they lay resting, Merrily snuggled close to Daniel. "You make the perfect pillow, dear Daniel," she murmured, feeling safe and content beside him. A few months after they had moved to Crescent City, Merrily confided in Daniel, tears in her eyes, that she wasn't feeling well. Daniel, concerned, gently examined her and asked about her symptoms, making sure to take care of her with the same kindness and compassion that had defined their relationship. He smiled and kissed her softly. "Dear Merrily, I think you might be expecting a baby," he told her. When they arrived at Benhurst, Daniel asked Merrily to prepare the office while he went to the telegraph office. He sent a message to his father-in-law in New Orleans, Louisiana. "The Crescent City," the telegraph operator said with a smile. "I spent some summers there when I was younger." "Message for Dr. Daniel Jordanaire," a young boy called as he entered. Daniel read that no one had seen or heard from Annette since he had left her at her father's home. He carefully sealed the telegram in a leather folder and placed it in his desk. He returned to the telegraph office and sent another message to a law office in New Orleans. "I want to start the divorce process right away," he said, and the telegraph operator quickly typed it out. When he stepped outside, he noticed that Merrily had brought both horses and was waiting patiently. "You could have just waited," he said. "I did wait," she replied simply. The lawyers in New Orleans agreed to handle his divorce case. It was not something they dealt with often, but it was not unheard of, especially due to infidelity. He sent the retainer fee along with the expected court costs. "What is this for?" Merrily asked, surprised. For a divorce so I can marry the mother of my child, Daniel explained. Oh, I'm still married too, Merrily exclaimed. While Daniel and Merrily talked about their future, Polly was telling Billy that they had no future together. I have a new guest, Polly said, pulling on her dress. But I love you, Billy protested. I thought I loved you too, until I saw what my new guest has to offer, Polly mentioned. She gently touched Billy's cheek. He was close to tears. Just go back to your wife. She must have forgiven you by now, Polly suggested. She kissed him and walked towards the door. Go on and show her what I've taught you, Polly said as she left. Billy stumbled out of the boarding house and walked to Main Street Saloon. Marissa welcomed him, and soon he was smiling and laughing, his mood lifted by the drinks. When he gave her a few coins and she led him upstairs, he tried to impress her with what Polly had shown him. You're quite good, huh? She giggled. A lawyer in Denver agreed to help Merrily end her marriage to William J. Benhurst III. Merrily felt dizzy at the $20 fee the attorney asked for, but Daniel offered to cover it without hesitation. Billy considered fighting the divorce. Losing someone like Merrily would be embarrassing, especially so soon after they married. After receiving the divorce papers from the lawyer, Billy stormed out of the mayor's office and headed to Dr. Jordan-Eyre. There will be no divorce, I love you, Billy said firmly, opening the door wide. There will be a divorce, Merrily replied as she stood up. The small bump was not very noticeable, but Merrily pointed to the swelling in her stomach. I am expecting a child, Billy, and you know it's not yours, she said sharply. She sat down again as Billy and everyone else in the office stared at her. She smiled when Daniel came over and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. I want to marry the father of my child. To do that, I need to be divorced from you, Merrily said, giving Daniel's hand a gentle pat. You deceitful person, Billy shouted at Daniel. Daniel turned and walked out of the office. Merrily patted Daniel's hand again and told the next patient it was their turn. Daniel got a small buggy and had a soft pillow placed on the seat to make Merrily comfortable. She frowned when she saw the buggy. But this is not needed, Daniel, she said. I can ride my horse just fine. Remember the other morning when she saw that snake? Daniel reminded her, gently rubbing her belly. Fine as you wish, Merrily said with a sigh and settled onto the pillow. They got comfortable in the seat, and Daniel flicked the reins. Their two horses began pulling the buggy as they headed toward Crescent City. Halfway between the town of Benhurst and Crescent City, Daniel stopped the horses. Billy was standing in the middle of the path, holding a shotgun. You would take another man's wife? Billy shouted, his words slurred. Daniel had his Colt, .45 in its holster. He worried that any sudden movement could make Billy pull the trigger. He couldn't risk harming Merrily or their baby. The loud noise could also frighten their horses. He raised his hands, showing they were empty. Billy frowned at this gesture. Merrily huffed with frustration as her husband swayed unsteadily. Billy had acted similarly the night he had done something terrible to her. Billy, whatever you plan to do with that, Daniel said calmly. Suddenly there was a shot, and Billy looked shocked before he fell to the ground. Merrily held a small, smoking pistol in her hand. Daniel jumped down from the wagon and went over to the groaning Billy. He noticed the red mark forming on his shoulder. I meant to hit him in the head, Merrily said as she checked her gun for more bullets. Merrily, put that away. He's hurt, Daniel urged as he lifted Billy into the wagon. You could have killed me, Billy complained as the rocky path jostled him. That was my goal, Merrily said fiercely. Daniel removed the bullet from Billy's shoulder, wrapped the wound with bandages, and sent him on his way. Then Merrily and Will started their journey back home. The next morning, Will and Billy visited Dr. Jordan-Eyre's office. What's this about you shooting my Billy because he won't give you a divorce? Will asked his daughter-in-law. Merrily explained what really happened and why she had shot his son. Daniel confirmed that Merrily was telling the truth. Miss Merrily, he won't contest the divorce, Will assured her. Boy, go home, your mother needs you, Will said angrily to his frightened son. She needs you a lot more than I need a weak deputy mayor. Epilogue. Their son, Anatole Daniel Jordan-Eyre, was already walking around and getting into everything before the divorce papers arrived from New Orleans, Louisiana. As Merrily was expecting another child, they waited until their daughter, Emily Anna Jordanair, was born before Reverend Dumble married Dr. Daniel Jordanair to Merrily Burgess. Norma Benhurst celebrated the return of her only child, ignoring her husband. She spoiled and cared for the young man. Will decided to stay in town since Norma made life at Benhurst Ranch difficult. He also disliked the smug look his son gave him whenever they met. Polly McCall made Will's time at her boarding house enjoyable. Soon after, Polly stopped taking new guests. In 1876, Norma unexpectedly became pregnant. Will knew it couldn't be his child since he hadn't been home in months. One glance at his son's face told him the truth, but he just shrugged. In 1876, Polly gave birth to a boy named David, after her father. Norma had a little girl named Adelaide, after her own mother. Unfortunately, little Adelaide had developmental challenges. Years later, this would be recognized as Down syndrome. In 1878, Norma became pregnant again. Sadly, both she and the baby passed away during childbirth, leaving Billy to care for their daughter alone. In 1899, they began building the Jordanair Medical College in Benhurst, Colorado. A steam shovel easily broke through the hard ground. Then work stopped when they found two well-preserved bodies in an underground shaft. The two men were Asian, believed to be in their late 20s or early 30s when they died. No one could identify the bodies of Mu Tai and Ung Sin Dao. The bathhouse workers had long since left Benhurst for San Francisco, California. Even today, those in the library's basement claim to hear hammering and two voices faintly calling for help. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.